Well, let's go into our question of the day, which is how do we deal with different parenting styles? I think this is a very common question that couples have because we were all raised differently.
Mhm.
Some of us were raised with spankings, and some of us were raised with timeouts, and some of us had a combination of the few of both. And there may be reasons why you don't want to use spankings as a form of punishment. Maybe you were abused growing up. Maybe it triggers something. These conversations have to be had, hopefully before you get married, but so many couples don't have these kinds of conversations. But at least before you have your child, take the time to say, how were you raised? What happened when you disobeyed at home? And what kind of things do you want to include in our parenting strategy?
Yeah, and sometimes certain things may fly out the window once you have the baby and you see how cute it is. And, maybe one parent or one spouse will become a little bit more lenient than the other. And that's another dynamic that is going to change your marriage for sure because, that's an everyday thing. Now you have another individual that you're responsible for. And now there's this tug of war of how to raise your kid. My way was right or your way was right. But the way I would say that you should approach parenting is, you know, not by saying, well, I was raised like this, so that's what we're going to do. You have to think about your family as a different unit and think about bringing the best of from both sides and just making something of your own, making your own traditions for your kids, thinking of the best ways to approach your child. Because again, when a child is born, they may need a different approach than what you needed as a child because they are their own individual. And we learn that even as our children age, like our kids are 5 and 6 and they're hitting different stages.
5 and 7.
5 and 7. Wow. See, and our son is going to be 6 in May. So they are just constantly changing and evolving and becoming like little adults themselves because they're processing information and we have to continue to steer them in the right direction. And a lot of times we have to get away from them and say, hey, I feel like we're struggling with this. What do you think our approach should be? And then come to an agreement of how we can approach this and start implementing it.
It can be incredibly frustrating at times to try to navigate the different personality types of your kids. And that's sort of the other thing I want to bring into the conversation, which is don't be so arrogant to say, well, this was how I was raised. This was what worked or didn't work. And so this is how I'm going to do it. The fact is, each child has to have an individualized approach. The way that one kid responds to corporal punishment is different than what another kid will. You have kids that are more strong-willed. You have kids that are more quiet and submissive. And to be honest, that's the dynamic of our children. Our daughter is very strong-willed. And so we have to approach things very differently than our son. And at the same time, just because she shows the most outward expression, often she can get our attention. And even when it comes to discipline, our son, because he's quiet, we have to make sure that we give him equal attention. Although he's more submissive, he's not getting screamed at a lot. That's still a form of attention. And I'm using the word scream very loosely. We do raise our voices at our kids, trust me, but not in an abusive way. But nevertheless, our son needs to be shown just as much attention, even though he's the more quiet one. So often parenting is relegated just to how you discipline them, but also how do you cultivate their gifts? What are the activities you're going to make room for in your home? How are you going to invest in them spiritually to make sure you're not just offloading their spiritual growth to the church, which sometimes is far and few and in between. They're not always getting what they should at the church. And then also letting them see you model behavior because they don't get what you tell them as much as they get what you show them. And being able to swallow the hard truth of what I'm seeing in my child is really a mirror reflection of who I am as well, because they're a part of you. And you will see hey, I hate this part about my kid, but if I'm honest, it's a part of myself that I have
Yeah.
not confronted either. So, all of those things are a part of the conversation that you need to have. You are not always going to agree, but you're going to have to come to a consensus. And one of you is going to have to put your pride down and say, you know, this is not a hill I'm willing to die on. So, I'll go with what you say. Don't go around and subvert that in a subtle way with your child. I'm only doing this because your father wants me to do this, but I don't really want to do it, right? That's undermining the authority of the other parent. Whenever you make a decision, it's a united front, no matter if you fully agree with that decision. There are some hills that maybe you choose to die on, figuratively, where you say, listen, I'm unwilling to budge here. It's a non negotiable. And if you're struggling to the degree where both of you have non negotiables that you're not willing to move on, maybe you need to seek some external help. We can help kind of navigate that conversation. Sometimes it comes down to context. Maybe you both agree, but you're just not saying it correctly. So reach out. We can help as well. And any last words on that question?
Yeah, I would say the healthiest parenting would be where both of the parents are in partnership. This is
Yes.
not me versus you. This is me partnering together. And again, like Ryan said, there are many times where you'll have to compromise and lay your pride aside in order to come to an agreement for the betterment of your child. So,
There's no such thing as a good cop and a bad cop. Both of you need to show times when there's discipline and comfort. There are inherent roles that men and women play in that dynamic, right? Men bring more of the governmental structure to the home, the authoritative voice and the direction of the family. And mothers do nurture more than not, obviously in a physical way, but also emotionally, spiritually. So you have to balance those roles, but that doesn't mean that when a father isn't present, that the mother cannot lay down the law. And that doesn't also mean that the father shouldn't show love, concern, compassion, and so on. But it's learning how to balance those roles. Sometimes, and I've seen reels, you feel like a single parent,
yeah.
that your spouse is not contributing in any form or fashion. They feel like going to work and coming home is enough. If you feel that way, you have to learn how to communicate what you're feeling. And if you don't feel that they are understanding, get a third party involved. Reach out. We can help. Maybe your pastor can help to communicate or mediate. I often point to Matthew chapter 18 when you're dealing with offense or unresolved issues. There's a 3-step approach that you can use. So go read Matthew 18 and learn how to get into agreement with your spouse, because that's where the power is released. And it's not agreeing about just the approach in and of itself, but the execution. Okay, we agree what's going to happen. Who's going to do it? When is it going to take place? There's a lot more layers to it than what we think. But we hope that answered your question of the week.